Okay. Hey, everybody. Chuck Holton here. Thank you for watching our live update tonight. I'm in Panama still, but I'm in just yet another hotel room. So I'm flying out in the morning. And so if it sounds like I'm in a toilet, that's because this room is not great with the acoustics. But thank you for being with us tonight. Let me know that you can hear me by just posting where you're coming in from in the chat, if you don't mind. Just go over to the chat and put the place you're watching from. I like to see all the different places where people are coming in from and watching the live. So I'm going to be speaking in Yucca Valley, California, coming up in day after tomorrow, I guess, or no, maybe, yeah, no, 2 days from tomorrow, Thursday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday morning, I guess. I'm going to be speaking in Yucca Valley, California. And I don't remember all the details offhand, but that's where I'm headed, behind enemy lines out to California. And so be praying for me. It should go well. It's a bunch of, I think it's a friendly audience, a bunch of cops and first responders out there. So I'm looking forward to that. And if you live in California, first of all, I'm sorry. But secondly, if you're anywhere in the vicinity, I'd love to catch up with you, shake your hand, and meet some Zonians. So if you're in Yucca Valley on Friday, look me up. Okay, so we're going to be talking about, are we about to have a nuclear war? I mean, are we teetering on the brink of disaster like they're making it sound in the news, or what? Because, you know, the news just loves to get you all riled up about whatever's going on. And I'm here to bring you a little bit of reason to that process. You know, there's always going to be something to worry about. And I just want to start out by saying that I don't think that as a Christian, I don't get afraid. I go to war zones for a living. Many times I will kind of look at something and go, a guy could get hurt doing that over there. But I don't get afraid anymore. And I don't think you should be either. You do not need to worry because God is in control. And most of the things that you are getting all spun up about are actually not true anyway. And that's what I want to talk about tonight. So first of all, so are we teetering on the brink of nuclear war? I'll just answer that right now. No, we're not. And I'm sure some people are going to get their undies in a wad because of this live, because of what I have to say. And so if you are easily offended, prepare to be offended. If I haven't offended you yet, just be patient. I'll get to you. But there are a lot of people, especially a lot of people who watch my show, who are going to have real heartburn about what I'm about to tell you. And so I hope that you will give me at least just give me the benefit of the doubt and listen to what I have to say tonight, because I want to put your mind at ease a little bit, give you some things to pray about for sure. But I want to let you know that the world is, the sky is not falling, and we are not about to go into a nuclear war. I know there are a lot of people out there for whom the thought that Joe Biden might be about to throw us into a nuclear war is just so titillating, because we just hate that guy, right? And that would be a way to say, man, if we got into a nuclear war, that would score some points for our team. Well, how about to heck with the teams, and let's just talk about the truth. That's what I want to do. See, like Sean Kinahan is saying, I want Russia to go all out now. Yeah, really? As if they haven't been going all out? Do you really think that Russia has gotten to the point where they've got to use Iranian drones, North Korean missiles, and North Korean soldiers to do their fighting for them, that they haven't been going all out? I mean, what are you saying? You want them to use nuclear weapons? Are you crazy? Like, let's try to be reasonable here. Okay, first of all, let's have a brief overview of what's happened. What the news is reporting is that here today is the 1000th day since Russia invaded Ukraine. It's been 1,000 days of war. I was there 3 weeks before the war started, and I stayed there for about 6 months on and off since the war started. I'm probably going back to Ukraine in a couple of weeks, and so I will let you know what it's like when I get on the ground there again. But in talking to the contacts that I have that are still on the ground there, that are living there in Ukraine, that are facing this every day, here's what's happening. So the Ukrainians have been asking for some time for permission from the United States to use some of the weapons that the United States has granted them, has sent them, that can strike a little bit deeper into Russia. Now, you're hearing a lot in the news about like this, for the first time, American missiles are being fired directly at Russia. That's not true. Actually, we've been firing, or Ukraine has been firing American-made all kinds of stuff, missiles, rockets, drones, artillery shells, JDAMs, anti-tank guided missiles at Russia and Russian troops for about 3 years now, going on 3 years, about, I would say, 1,000 days or so. So this is the fact that they are, that the ATACMS missiles that they're talking about are being fired at Russia is not much of a departure from what they have been doing already. And if you want to play that game, Russia did it first. I mean, Russia globalized this conflict by bringing in North Korean soldiers and, Iranian drones and missiles from North Korea and possibly ammunition from China as well. So this is just the Ukrainians sort of catching up to where the Russians have been for some time already. Now, what is an ATACMS missile? This is the thing people are making a big deal about. Oh, it's a ballistic missile. Yes, it is. An ATACMS missile has a little bit more range than some of the missiles and rockets that we have already granted to Ukraine. Now, if you keep in mind that the HIMARS missiles, which are American-made missiles that we've given to Ukraine, we gave them HIMARS a year and a half ago, or more than that. That was another red line that Russia said, if you give them those, it's going nuclear. And so that's what I want to talk about next. The ATACMS missiles are U.S. Army missiles that have a range. The ones that Ukraine has only have a range of about 200 kilometers. They're older versions of. Is it okay? Yeah. Okay. They're older versions of these particular missiles. The newer ones can fire up to 300 kilometers or perhaps more, but they've got the older ones, okay? And so that means that they can fire like 100 miles into Russia, farther than they've been able to fire before with the HIMARS missiles. And they struck apparently with some of those today. Russia says that they fired 6 of them. Ukraine has not corroborated that, so we don't know how many they fired. Could have been just one. Likely was just one. And that missile struck its target, a military ammunition dump in Bryansk, As a matter of fact, I have a map here of where this thing struck, if I can get to that. Media. Here's what they look like, by the way. This is what the missile looks like. I mean, it just looks like any other missile, right? It's not like you can, that might not actually tell you a whole lot, what it does it. But now I thought I had a map, but I guess I don't. Let me just make this a little bit bigger. Maybe I still, no, I don't have the map. So Bryansk is not actually all that far from the border with Ukraine, and but it was a spot they had not been able to reach before, apparently, and so they struck it with one of these missiles. Now Russia says they fired 6 missiles. Russia shot down, or 7 missiles. Russia shot down 6 of the 7 and damaged the 7th, and the 7th fell down and caused a fire. Well, if you look at the footage of that's come out of Russia of this strike, no, it was a missile that struck what it was aiming at. It looks like the 4th of July when it goes off. The secondary explosions tell the story. And so once the missile hits, if you see a big, all kinds of stuff going in the air and things like that, well, then they struck a weapons depot, an ammunition depot, something like that, and cooked off a bunch of ammo. You can go see the video of the strike on chuckholton.com. I put it up over there, and you can go look at it if you want to see what I'm talking about. But it looks like, one of the gigantic what are those called, fireworks that you see on 4th of July, the biggest ones. It went off right at ground level, and just things went all directions. Boom, big old explosion. So it's likely that whatever was fired struck its target. And just from looking at the battle damage there, it appears that they damaged something important. And now Russia is obviously not going to admit that. And what Russia has been learning throughout this war is that Russian technology does not hold a candle to Western technology. And I'm going to get back to that in just a minute. Okay, so these ATACMS missiles can go 100 plus miles into Russia, and we've started to allow them to do so. Okay, and this is causing the big hullabaloo. Vladimir Putin came out, and what they did is they changed the nuclear war. They changed the threshold by which they decide in Russia whether or not to go nuclear, and they lowered it. And what they lowered it from was, if we get attacked by another nuclear armed country or entity, then we will respond with nuclear force. That was what it was before. What they've changed it to now is, if we get attacked by a country that's not nuclear armed, but is being supported by a nuclear armed force, then we reserve the right to go nuclear. Well, that would, you read into that, Ukraine does not have nukes anymore because they gave them to Russia, but the United States does, and the United States is supporting Ukraine. Therefore, anything that Ukraine does to strike at Russia would theoretically cross the red line and allow Russia to use nuclear force. Now, why do I think that's unlikely? First of all, let's spend a little time talking about the history of Russia's threats to go nuclear. Now, since 2022, February 22nd, 2022, when the war against Ukraine began, and I would ask you to go to chuckholton.com and watch the documentary excerpt that I put up today. You don't have to be a paying supporter to watch the excerpt. And I was going to put it on here tonight and show it to you, but it's got music in it, and that would get me demonetized. But this documentary I made is about some of the things that Russia has done to Ukraine since February 2022. And if you can watch that and tell me that Russia is justified in what it's doing, then you've got no heart or no soul. But since February 2022, right when that happened, Vladimir Putin made his first nuclear threat. He put his nuclear forces on high alert, and he said, if Ukraine gets any help from NATO, the United States, anybody, then we will go nuclear. And well, you know what happened. They got lots of help from NATO. Russia didn't go nuclear. Let's see here. The second time they did that, where am I? I just lost my place. Here we are. The second time that happened was when they annexed, that was what I was looking for, they annexed Luhansk and Donetsk in the Donbass. And they said, if anybody strikes at Luhansk and Donetsk, that's now part of Russia. And any strike on Russia means we're going nuclear. And they didn't go nuclear. They said every place that Russia has taken now belongs to Russia. And if anybody takes it back from us, if anybody tries to push us out of it, we will go nuclear. Well, they got pushed out of Irpin and Bucha. They got pushed out of Kherson. They got pushed out of Zaporizhia. So they've been pushed out of a lot of areas that they had taken, and they didn't go nuclear. And so what do you see here? What do you notice in this trend? Russia likes brinksmanship, or at least Vladimir Putin does. He likes that brinksmanship, and he tries to manipulate his enemies through that talking smack, basically. Now, one of the other things he did was he said, because Ukraine was calling for NATO to declare a no-fly zone over Ukraine because of Russian aircraft coming in there and bombing them. And the United States and NATO wouldn't do it. And that's partially because Russia said, if you declare a no-fly zone over Ukraine, then we'll go nuclear. And in that case, what they did was, instead of declaring a no-fly zone, they just gave anti-aircraft missiles to Ukraine, Stinger missiles and JDAMs and things like that. And Ukraine just shot down all of the Russian aircraft that were flying over their territory, to the point where Russian aircraft basically cannot fly into Ukrainian territory anymore. So we didn't declare a no-fly zone. We just gave Ukraine the ability to enforce it themselves. And Russia still didn't go nuclear. So there's been, by my count, 6 times total when Russia has said that they were going to go nuclear, but then didn't. Okay. And yeah, the no-fly zone. In April of 2022, Russia claimed that supplying advanced HIMARS weapons would cross a red line and would lead to nuclear consequences. We gave them the HIMARS. Russia didn't do anything. In September of 2022, during Ukraine's counteroffensive, Putin threatened to use every means available, including nuclear, to defend the annexed territories. And even though they lost Kharkiv and Sumy and a whole bunch of regions up there in the north, they didn't deploy nuclear weapons. So it just goes on and on like this. Russia has warned that attacks on Crimea could trigger a nuclear retaliation. Well, guess what? The Ukrainians have sunk every Russian ship that was in port in Sevastopol over there. They basically had made them shut down the port of Sevastopol, and they have struck the Kerch Bridge multiple times. Those are in Crimea. Russia still has not gone nuclear. Okay, so you're getting a trend here. Russia's nuclear posturing is a part of their strategy to try to influence the West into doing what they want. But Russia is not likely to use a nuke. Why are they not likely to use a nuke? Well, number one, let's talk about the costs to Russia. Let's do a cost benefit analysis, okay? Before I do that, though, I want to just ask you to please go and hit the like button and subscribe to the podcast. Only about half the people who watch this thing are actually subscribed. And it doesn't cost you anything to subscribe. You're not going to get a bunch of spam if you subscribe. All it will do is bring up my videos more often in your feed and will alert you when we're about to go live. So if you like catching these lives, then just go hit the subscribe button. And you can go over to chuckholton.com and you can subscribe over there and become a supporter. And that'd be great too. I appreciate that very much. And that helps me be more independent and helps me pay for going to the places that I go to bring you the reporting that I do. So thank you very much for all that. Now, what is the cost benefit analysis of Russia going nuclear? Well, first of all, NATO and the United States have, and I'm repeating myself because the United States is part of NATO, they have warned Russia repeatedly that if they go nuclear, that we will go nuclear back. And then what you have is complete destruction of Russia. Now, it might turn into complete destruction of the globe if that were to happen. And the Russians might be, might hold a different worldview than we do, but they're not stupid. And they know, and Putin knows for sure, Putin is all about regime, maintaining his regime, keeping power. And he knows that if he goes nuclear, that his reign is over, that his country will be crushed. And if they use whether that's a tactical nuke, a strategic nuke, it doesn't matter. We have said, a tactical nuke is even less useful. It's even more worthless in terms of an actual offensive weapon. Nuclear weapons only function as a deterrent. They work better than a deterrent if you're the only one that has them. But once everybody has them, they only function as a deterrent, because the minute you open that Pandora's box, everybody uses a nuke and it's all over. Now, perhaps Vladimir Putin is just crazy enough to make the calculation that the United States and NATO are more reasonable than he is. And so if he uses a nuke, we won't use one back. But even if we didn't, his country would be crushed anyway. Because first of all, you're looking at a country, Russia is a country that has a very degraded military at this point. They've lost all of their major modern battle tanks. They're using museum pieces at this point out of, they are making some new tanks. They are, don't get me wrong. They do have a few new ones, but they can't crank out new tanks as fast as they're losing them. And they've gone through their stocks of old tanks, most of which are now Vietnam era or earlier. And they're trying to fix them up as fast as they can and put them out on the battlefield, but they don't have anything near what NATO and the United States has. And if they've learned anything from this conflict, it's that Russian tanks don't do well when faced with Western armor of any kind. As a matter of fact, there are plenty of videos you can find out there of American Bradley infantry fighting vehicles taking on Russian tanks and winning. And an infantry fighting vehicle is not supposed to be able to take out a tank. But Russian tanks are that old and that behind in the technology that the IFVs are taking them out. And not only that, but they've had a lot of tanks lost to $1,000 drones. So their infantry are down to the point where they're literally having to bring in troops from North Korea, untested troops that are as green as anything. And they are having a hard time paying for it all. And I'm going to get to the paying for it all more in just a minute. So stick around for that, because you're going to want to hear this. So even if Russia used a nuke and then NATO decided not to nuke them back, it wouldn't matter. If we went in, there would be direct confrontation between NATO and Russia at that point, and Russia would lose, and lose badly and quickly. Russia has a great tolerance for loss. Lost 12 million people in World War II and kept going until they won. So they have a huge tolerance for pain, but they're not going to win against NATO. NATO represents 60% of the total combat power on planet Earth. And there's no way Russia's going to stand up to that. And they know it. They know it better than you know it. And so they're not going to do this. If they did use a nuke, the economic isolation that they feel now would be child's play compared to the economic isolation that they would get afterwards. I mean, even their so-called friends like China and India would probably stop doing business with them. Russia likes to push those boundaries and talk a big game, but they rarely cross those lines. And you know the doctrine of mutually assured destruction, which is just, you have nukes, we have nukes, you use your nukes, we use our nukes, everybody dies. There you go. It's all over. There's no winning in that for Russia. Okay. Even, I mean, and Russia might hate us, but they don't hate us enough to be willing to die for us. Do you see what I'm saying? Now, Russia is currently on, let's get to the economic part. Russia is currently on a complete war footing. Their economy is growing, but only because of the military spending that they're doing. So they're absolutely blowing out the budget. The entire economy is being retooled to just, focus on war materiel, almost like the United States did in World War II. Right now, inflation in Russia is very high, almost 9% a year. The central bank interest rate in Russia, get this, is 21%. Anybody know what the central bank interest rate is in the United States right now? What is it, 5 3/4, something like that? Now, that one metric alone tells us a whole lot about Russia, what Russia is likely to do. Because if you've got a central bank interest rate of 21%, you got big problems. Big problems. That means you've got a super tight labor market, and that's because you've mobilized most of your workforce and they're out at the front lines getting killed at the rate of 1,000 to 1,500 a day. Okay. So there's not, I mean, that means there's not a lot of people to do the work, but the demand is huge because you've got this huge war machine that needs to be fed. So it's overheating the economy because of all this defense spending. They've got structural weaknesses in their energy exports, meaning, before the war, Russia got 40% of its GDP from its oil and gas revenues, and the vast majority of that went to Europe. Now, very little of it goes to Europe. There's still some, and that probably will stop once Trump becomes president. And actually, I'll talk about that again if you want. I mean, we talked about it before when Trump got elected. Trump doesn't need to spend a bunch of money on Ukraine to help Ukraine win this war. all he has to do is open up the taps of American oil to the point, just crank it up, crank up American oil production to the point where the price of oil goes down, which is good for you at the pump, but also very bad for Russia because it means that they've got to keep making less and less money for the same amount of work. And they don't have the ability to crank up the amount of oil that they're selling right now, because the majority of the oil that they're able to sell anymore goes to two places: Israel. Oh my gosh. India and China. And India and China are only buying Russian oil because they get it at a massive discount, about 30% over market rate. So, you know, there's a global market for oil, right? And and those prices are set by supply and demand. But right now, China and India are getting really good deals on their oil because they're buying it at a third cheaper than everybody else because they can get it from Russia. The problem is it's very difficult for Russia to get a tremendous amount of oil to those two countries because they don't have pipelines going that direction by and large. And it's going to be years before they could build them. So they just don't have the infrastructure to crank up their oil production or their oil sales. And because of that, they're very limited on how much they can actually crank up their economy to fund the war. Those structural weaknesses in their energy export sector are a huge Achilles heel for Russia right now. All right. They have very limited access to technology because most of the technology, the high technology computer chips and things like that, that they used in their, high-tech weaponry and stuff like that came from the West. Russia doesn't make that stuff, and they're not buying it directly anymore because of the sanctions. So they have to get it through other means, like talking to some of their friends like Armenia. Armenia's purchases of high-tech chips have gone through the roof since the war started. And believe me, those aren't staying in Armenia. They're getting passed right on to Russia. And Armenia should definitely stop doing that if they really want to be more of a Western country like they're pretending. So Trish S asks, could Russia be hiding resources to appear weakened for whatever reason, like bluffing? No, not really. Yeah, I've heard that. Like Russia really hasn't used their real army yet. They've just been using their National Guardsmen and their old, fat, sick, and lame people that they've been sending those guys to the front. And boy, when they really send in their stormtroopers, then you'll see how good the Russian army is. No, Russia started out with its stormtroopers. Those guys are all dead, and they have gotten down now to the point that that Germany was at in 1945, where they're using old men and young men and prisoners and North Korean soldiers. Okay, now that's not stupid of Russia. Russia is doing what makes sense for Russia, and it's actually cheaper for Russia, most likely, to use North Korean troops and not kill off the rest of its breeding stock, because like I say, Russia's in terminal decline. They're not having anywhere near enough babies to even repopulate their country after this war. And this will be the last war that Russia ever fights as a country. I believe that with all my heart, because they just aren't, they don't have the manpower, and they're not making babies. So the Russian race is dying out. So incidentally is the Ukrainian race, if you could call it that. Now, those sanctions make it difficult for Russia it weakens Russia, makes it difficult for them to build up their industrial and energy sectors, to continue to build out lots of new tanks or missiles or things like that, anything other than like artillery shells. Anything that needs a computer chip, it's pretty tough to get now in Russia. Okay. They are trying to make up for the losses of sales of everything to the West by selling more to the East. But that again is a saturated market, to say the least. I mean, you're trying to sell your tchotchkes to China would be like trying to sell icicles to Eskimos, because China has all the tchotchkes it needs, right? Um, I mean, China is the mother lode of uh, you know consumer products stuff. So they make it in China. They don't make it. If they make it in Russia, selling it in China is not a huge market for them. Uh, Now, let's talk about the strategic considerations. Russia prefers strategically to leverage nuclear threats rather than actually use them. Again, they know what it would do to them if they actually use them. Now, let's talk just a minute about the difference between strategic nukes and tactical nukes. Now, strategic nukes are uh, multi-hundred kiloton nuclear warheads that would take out like a city, or at least a good portion of a city, and would potentially kill hundreds of thousands of people. A tactical nuke can be dialed down to be very small and maybe take out a city block. And I mean, there's no real reason for them to use a tactical nuke from a tactical standpoint in the war, because tactical nukes would be designed to deny an area to the enemy that you don't need yourself. But there are not a lot of areas like that in this conflict. And so if they set off a tactical nuke, they're going to deny whatever small area that they blow up with that tactical nuke to the Ukrainians. But that's not what they're trying to do. They're trying to take from the Ukrainians and use it for their own land. So that doesn't really help them a lot. Uh, Now, and if they use a tactical nuke, they get all of the negatives of using a strategic nuke, meaning NATO enters the war, and the war and Russia loses. Okay, so what they're doing right now is they're trying to jump up and down and puff up their chest and talk a bunch of smack right before Donald Trump takes office, because what they're trying to do is put these things on the table. It's like if you come in and your daughter brings home her boyfriend, if you come in and sit down across the kitchen table for him and say, okay, son, what are your intentions for my daughter? You may get a little bit, you may get an answer you don't necessarily appreciate, which is like, yo, man, I think I'm gonna, yeah, that kind of thing. I only had that happen once with one of my daughters, and it didn't go well. But if you came into the room to meet with your daughter's prospective boyfriend, and you sat down at the kitchen table and you pulled out of your pocket a Bowie knife and set it on the table, and then pull out a Glock pistol and set it on the table, and then said, all right, son, now I want you to tell me, maybe pull out a pair of pliers and set it on the table, maybe a taser. And you say, son, I want you to tell me, if you had to lose, just rhetorically, if you had to lose one part of your body, what part would that be? And you start the conversation that way, you might get more of an, sir, no, sir, no, not at all, sir. Yes, sir, I know, right? So that's what Russia's trying to do. Russia is trying to lay these cards on the table and make it look really scary for the whole world, so that when it comes time to come to the negotiating tables, because that seems like it's coming sooner rather than later, they will have the ability to, sort of scare the other side into perhaps giving them a little more of what they want. Okay, so everybody liked my word picture there. Yeah. Okay, let's see here. I thought I saw a question go by that I wanted to answer. Is Russia really that stupid? I'm not sure what's stupid. Sorry. Um, I'm the Broken Eagle says we're already dead. We just don't know it yet. Okay. Sun says, Chuck, I heard the opposite about Russia from a valid source. Russia has saved their elite forces and high grade weapons. Do not be deceived. Well, then you must have spent more time over there than I have, because I was there for the first several months of the war, and I was out on the front lines on a regular basis, and I saw a lot of Russia's elite forces and high grade weaponry, uh, most of it charred to ash, and the people and the weaponry. Uh, the guys that we found, and these were by their hundreds. I mean, there was so many Russian dead out there. It was ridiculous. Um, those were not their rear echelon troops. Those were their frontline troops. And there's plenty of proof out there that Russia has lost a very significant portion of their most modern weaponry, lost or used up. Not to mention the fact that they've probably lost over 300,000 troops. Think about that. That's a large city worth of people. 300,000 men lost. And that doesn't count the ones that were wounded. Now, normally, in a normal war, the number of wounded can be calculated usually as 3 times the number that you have dead. So if there's 1,000 dead, you should have 3,000 probably that are wounded. It doesn't actually work that way in this war with Russia, because Russia doesn't treat its wounded by and large, not very much. And there are actual videos, recent videos of Russian troops that are out on patrol. One of their guys gets shot. He's shot in the leg. He's, writhing around in pain on the ground. And the next guy in line behind him just walks by him, shoots him in the head, and keeps on running. They kill their own wounded, is what I'm saying. And so that's one of the reasons why their number of dead is so high. So it's probably, over 300,000 dead and something like 150,000 wounded on top of that. But there are very reputable open source intelligence sources like Bellingcat and the MI5 for the UK and others, the open source intelligence that have corroborated this fact that Russia has they've run their military into the ground. I mean, if what you're saying was correct, then why do they need to be importing all this weaponry from Iran? And why do they need to be getting artillery shells and missiles and troops from North Korea now? I mean, this is almost North Korea's war at this point. They're saying that North Korea could have very soon up to 100,000 troops in Russia fighting in the war against Ukraine. So Topi asks, is the nuclear saber rattling just a smoke screen for the Baltic Sea communications cable sabotage? So if you didn't see that news, there were 2 undersea communications cables in the Baltic that were cut today or over the last couple of days, and they just figured out who did it. As it turns out, they have stopped a Chinese trawler that they believe was responsible for cutting those cables. And incidentally, 4 days ago, that trawler was docked in Russia. And so it's very likely that this is a Russian, they call this asymmetric warfare. There have been all kinds of things, hacking attacks. There have been all sorts of sabotage all across Europe. And that the amount of sabotage has been going up pretty dramatically over the last year. And that's traceable right back to Russia. So Russia is engaging in very high level information war and asymmetric war. And you are being affected by the information war for sure. I mean, if you're not watching this channel, and some of the people who are watching this channel, I'm looking at some of the comments, I'm just like, oh my gosh, are you reading like Russia Today to get that information? Like that's coming in directly from Russia. Question, Chuck, have you heard about Italy offering Americans who are upset with the elections homes for $1? They've been doing that for years. They don't have to be upset with the elections. Anybody can go to Italy and buy a home for $1. Why? Because so many Italians have left Italy for two reasons. One is the unchecked immigration from North Africa that has really changed Italy for the worse. You import, as it turns out, millions of third world, Africans, and you don't turn them into good Europeans overnight. They actually turn Europe into third world Africa. And that's what they've been doing. That's one reason that Italians are leaving. The other reason is because the taxes are just so darn high. And we have a lot of Italians that live in our little town here in Panama. And they say that all of them say they left because of the taxes. So yes, there are lots of villages in central Italy that are all but ghost towns now because everybody has left. And they're gentrifying. I mean, the population is aging. They have a real population problem. Folks, would you just go out and start having babies for Pete's sake? This world needs more babies. A lot of countries are struggling with this whole, death spiral of demographic decline, including the United States. And if we don't get busy literally soon having more babies, we're going to be in that terminal decline that is not recoverable. So unless you want our country and a lot of the other modern countries in the world to be populated exclusively by robots over the next century, then we better get busy encouraging our kids and our grandkids to get out there and breed, have as many kids as they can, and homeschool them so that the government doesn't get their mitts on them. Okay. But yeah, you can buy a home in Italy for $1, and all you have to do is agree to fix it up, which could cost you quite a bit. And then you have to agree to pay taxes on it, which is where they really get you. Okay. I'm looking to see if you have a question. Go ahead, Connie. If you see a question, can you pin it for me? Do you see any evidence of a hook being formed in Russia's jaw to be drawn down out of the north? I know what you're talking about, but I know at this point I don't. I mean, I think. Well, I'm not going to get into all the prophecy stuff. I'm just not going to get into that. Question, is the Russian birth rate suffering due to loss of life among young Russian soldiers? No, the birth rate was suffering long before this war. They were in terminal decline before they got into this war. But losing 300,000 of your best breeding stock certainly is not going to help. It's just going to exacerbate that decline. And that's why I say Russia will never again fight another war. Now, right now, Vladimir Putin needs this war to continue, because if it stopped tomorrow, his whole economy would collapse. And this is the thing. We need to keep pointing out that there is only one party in this conflict who could easily end this war tomorrow, and that's Russia. And all they would have to do is just leave, just pull out, stop fighting. Ukraine didn't attack Russia up until just recently when they took some of Russia's land as a bargaining chip. But this is an aggression against Ukraine by Russia. And again, folks, if you have not seen my documentary on Russian atrocities in Ukraine, I highly recommend you go see it. You can watch the entire documentary by becoming a supporter at chuckholton.com. But if you, there's a sizable excerpt, a good 25 for 30% of the entire documentary is available for free right now on my chuckholton.com website. And all you have to do is go over there and you can watch it. And look, we put up interviews, we put up video, we put up all sorts of, I can't even show that documentary on YouTube because it's far too graphic. But if you want to see the things that we saw in Ukraine when we went into the areas that had been held by Russia and Russia had lost, go and watch that documentary. It will make the hair stand up on the back of your neck. And if you can watch that documentary and still say that you support Russia in this conflict, then I don't know what to tell you, man. I just don't. And if you support Russia in this conflict and you won't go watch that documentary, well, you answered your own question. We don't need to discuss that anymore. Okay, so I already answered that question. Question Mama Rissa asks, does Putin respect Trump? Well, he definitely respects him more than Biden. He feels like he could get more of what he wants out of Donald Trump because Donald Trump has signaled that. But I think that Trump is smart enough, and some of his advisors are smart enough, that there's a way that they could placate Russia by saying, we're not going to give Ukraine as much stuff anymore, military help or money, but then go ahead and cause Russia to lose the war by making their economy collapse. They could make their economy collapse by making the price of oil go down. And you can make the price of oil go down by cranking up the amount of oil that has been, that the United States exports. Okay. Now, actually, this wasn't reported on in the mainstream media, but the Biden administration started doing this during when the election campaign began. They started increasing the amount of oil drilling permits and production permits and stuff in the United States, trying to make the price of gas go down. And it worked to some extent, but we got a lot further that we could go. And if Donald Trump does what he says he's going to do in the energy sector, that could be the death knell for Russia. And if they get a ceasefire agreement in Russia, or between Russia and Ukraine, even if it gives Russia all the land that they currently possess, even if it gives them back the Kursk region up there that Ukraine currently possesses inside Russia, it's still going to be really bad for Russia, because coming down off of that, they're on kind of a meth high right now in Russia from an economic standpoint because of the being on a war footing. They've been just cranking out as much military stuff as they possibly can to fund to feed the war machine, and that has artificially increased the growth of their economy. But as soon as the war is over and they no longer need all those artillery shells and missiles and weapons and ammunition and stuff like that, and they no longer have all those workers, and so then unemployment rate starts going up. They get all these guys come home from the war and they're all messed up and need assistance. Well, then Russia's economy can't, what you call a hard landing, and it would be very difficult for Russia to climb down off of this meth high that they're on now. And so either way, if the war continues, Russia is kind of screwed. If the war ends, Russia is kind of screwed. As the most ironic thing about this conflict is that it ended up being a self-fulfilling prophecy by Vladimir Putin. He started the war saying, we have to start this war because we've got all these Nazis in Ukraine, which does not mean Nazis like you and I think. When Russians say Nazis, they think something different than we do, because they fought the Nazis directly in World War II. And so a Nazi in Russian is shorthand for anybody who disagrees with Russia. Anybody we don't like, it's kind of like the left in the United States, as a matter of fact. So they had a country in Ukraine who wasn't real happy with Russia, but there were plenty of people, especially in the eastern part of Ukraine, who spoke Russian, had family in Russia, went back and forth, went to Russia on vacation, no big deal. It wasn't that tense. And then 2014 happened, and it got quite a bit more tense. And then 2022 happened, and now the Ukrainians, whether they speak Russian as their first language or not, they hate Russia with a passion. And there's people, we interviewed people in my documentary about that. And again, go to chuckholton.com, you can watch it. So they also said that they had to invade Ukraine because Ukraine wanted to join NATO. Well, actually, NATO was not all that keen on Ukraine joining at that point. What they were actually looking to join was the European Union. They just wanted to be more of a European country than a Russian country. They're looking at the way the Russians live. They're looking at the way the Europeans live, and they're saying, I think we'll go with this over here. We kind of like this Western style of freedom and democracy and all that. We kind of like that over there. We don't really like this Russian way of doing things, trying to put together the Soviet reunion. Half the people in the country are alcoholic, and I mean, it's we don't necessarily want to live that way. We've seen both, and we want to choose Europe. Well, if Russia thought that they were worried that Ukraine was going to join Europe before the war, what do you think the chances are that people want to join Europe now after having a couple 100,000 of their citizens murdered by Russia? Right? It's self-fulfilling prophecy. Russia pushed Ukraine into the arms of NATO, and NATO caused NATO to have a reason to exist again. NATO was sort of failing. NATO didn't have a lot of reason to be around for a while until Russia started doing this. And now NATO's as strong as ever, and more people want to join NATO. I talked to a lot of people in Armenia who want to join NATO, and they're not even in the North Atlantic. William Faulkner says, any update on Russia-Venezuela cooperation in the Caribbean? They are still cooperating. Russia and Iran and Venezuela are cooperating on oil and gas stuff, not to any real great effect. Morning Doom says, you're wrong, Chuck. Well, tell me how I'm wrong. Come on, give me your argument, man. Come on, Morning Doom. Don't just say I'm wrong. Give me something. Give me a reason. I mean, maybe you spent more time in Ukraine during the war than I have. And if you have, then tell me what I'm wrong about. I'm open-minded. I'll listen. If you're not going to post why I'm wrong, then I guess you just answered your own question, didn't you? Let's see here. Russian man I know, Oleg, said Americans speak like Nazis because we're sick of them. I'm not sure what that means, Mary Grace Beyer. I'm not sure what that means. Question, I thought Russia invaded Ukraine because of biolabs near Russia's border. Okay, Barbara, thank you for bringing it up. I knew somebody would. Oh, boy. Okay, I'm going to tell the biolab story once again. Those of you that have already heard it 1,000 times, please accept my apologies ahead of time. So this is Russian propaganda. It's based on a half-truth. And the half-truth is that the United States did support laboratories in lots of places around the world, including Ukraine. Now, these laboratories were not creating bioweapons. They were mostly just veterinary clinics that had a lab, and or veterinary universities and things like that had a lab. And what the United States did was they paid to upgrade those labs' capabilities, because you may not know much about anthrax, but anthrax is a naturally occurring pathogen that lives in the soil of pretty much any farm in the world. If you go to any farm around the world and you dig in the soil, you can find anthrax in that soil. Now, why doesn't it kill people? Because in order for anthrax to be powerful enough to start killing people, it has to be highly concentrated. And to do that takes basically a state actor. Peter Ortiz, thank you for that question about the elections. I'll get to that next. It takes a state actor to take anthrax out of the soil and turn it into an aerosolized weaponized form of anthrax. Now, almost any lab, especially veterinary universities and things like that, can do a simple test for anthrax in animals and soil and things like that. But what they cannot do is tell the difference between naturally occurring anthrax that's not really dangerous and the highly dangerous aerosolized or weaponized anthrax that's concentrated by a state actor. And so what the United States was doing was they were improving the capabilities of these labs so that they could tell the difference. Okay, but this is a passive monitoring type thing, not a bioweapon creation type thing. Okay, and there were 15 labs in Ukraine that received funds from the United States Defense Advanced Research Project or something like that. Defense. Oh shoot! I just spaced on the name of the project. Anyway, I have a good friend who's actually a part of the program, the U.S. military program that did this. So I got it straight from the horse's mouth, and you can find that video on my YouTube channel if you go search for it. Just go search for Biolabs on my YouTube channel, and you'll find the video I did from one of the Biolabs. Okay, so the United States was funding about 15 of these labs. Again, they're defensive in nature in order to be able to give us advanced early warning if some form of weaponized pathogen shows up somewhere in the world. And it actually saved a whole bunch of cattle in America one time because one of the labs that we supported in the UK identified a hoof and mouth disease that they probably wouldn't have had the capability to do otherwise. And we were able to stop the trade of beef between the two countries, and we didn't have to slaughter all of the animals in our country because of it. So it was actually a pretty good program. Now, these labs, now I've been to 2 actual bioweapons labs in my life that are owned and run by the United States. Both of them are in the United States. It would be the height of stupidity for the United States to allow a bioweapons creation facility to be situated outside the US. So the 2 that I've been to were in Maryland and in Utah, Dugway Proving Grounds, Utah. And they are very highly secure, like a supermax prison, secure, with huge fences around them, and there's signs on the fences that say deadly force authorized. If you come near, no photography, no. I mean, they are serious facilities. Okay. And you can imagine if they're weaponizing pathogens in there, you would want that kind of security around it. But I went and visited 3 of the sites that were on the list of places. Well, no, I'm sorry. 2 of them were on the list of places the U.S. had funded, and one of them was a place that Russia was saying was a bioweapons lab that they bombed. And that place was just a heating unit for a neighborhood. That's all it was. It wasn't a lab at all. The 2 labs I went to were veterinary teaching, like veterinary hospital and veterinary universities. One of them was in downtown Kyiv in a residential area with no security at all. I actually walked right in the front door. It has a low fence around it, about waist high, around the building. And then you walk up, the fence is open, unlocked, no security, walk right in, open the doors and walk right into the lab. So that obviously is not a bioweapons creation facility. Okay. But Russian propagandists have been putting out ever since prior to 2022 that the United States was funding weapons labs for the creation of biological weapons in Ukraine for use on Russia. That's what they were putting out. And it just appalls me to see how many of you believe that, have believed that sort of thing. When, if you just, spend a little time thinking about that, like, would they really put a bioweapons lab in a residential neighborhood in a country we don't control? Does that sound like a good idea? And many of you I know are skeptical because of what happened in during the sea crisis in 2020 over in China. But that was number one, something that was likely being done illegally by various components like Anthony Fauci of the US government. And number two, what was being done there was not actually sanctioned by the United States. It was China taking something that was funded by the United States and doing their own stuff on it, most likely. Okay. Now, I know I told you guys are going to get your undies in a wad over this, and here we go. All right. Now, why did Peter Ortiz asks, why did Zelenskyy cancel the elections in Ukraine? Okay, he did not cancel the elections in Ukraine. That is that's misinformation. The Ukrainian constitution says that during time of war, elections will be suspended until the war is over. That, I mean, you can go find it. You can go just Google Ukrainian constitution. You can use Google Translate. You can translate it in English. You can read it for yourself. The Ukrainian constitution prohibits elections during wartime. Now, why would they do that? Well, if you got a bunch of soldiers that are out on the front line, it might be a little difficult for those guys to be able to vote, don't you think? If you've been to the front lines like I have, or if you've seen any videos from the front lines, it's like World War I out there. They don't have voting booths. They can't come down off the front line. They're fighting for their survival. They've been fighting for 1,000 days. They cannot come back off the front line to vote. But even if they could, there's about 20% of Ukraine, many Ukrainians, many that I actually have met personally, who are now in occupied territory that's being held by Russia. And it's not possible for those people to vote. So how does that work? If they just go ahead with the election and say, well, we're just going to take the election anyway, and even if the Constitution didn't prohibit it, okay, we'll just go ahead and have the election. And then somebody, let's say Zelenskyy gets reelected. Well, what happens when the war gets won? Those areas that are being occupied by Russia are no longer occupied by Russia, and the millions of people who were under Russian occupation come back and file lawsuits and say, wait a minute, we didn't vote for this guy who's now in charge. We didn't vote for him. And so that was not a legitimate election. Not to mention the fact that there are still like 4 million Ukrainians who are refugees outside of Ukraine that wouldn't be able to get back in time to vote. So I hope that answers your question. He did not cancel the elections. He followed the constitution of the country, which says that elections cannot be held during wartime. And I just explained all the reasons why. And on top of that, Vladimir Zelenskyy still has a very high approval rating. And so he probably will not run for re-election because he's going to be done after this, without a doubt. But believe me, he would like to have an election and get somebody new to come take over the reins of this thing. He is, can you imagine the stress of trying to fight for your own country's survival for 3+ years, for 1,000 days. I mean, it's got to be unbelievably stressful. And throughout the first half of this war so far, his approval rating was running in the 90s. So what's Trump's approval rating been his first term? What was Biden's approval rating? In the 30s? Okay. So everybody likes to say, oh, Zelenskyy is so corrupt. He's got yachts and houses and villas all over the world. No, he doesn't. That's Russian propaganda yet again. Vladimir Zelenskyy does not own a yacht. He does not own houses and supercars and all that stuff. He's a wealthy man. He was a wealthy man before he got elected. He is Ukraine's version of Donald Trump. I'm telling you, he's not a politician. He was an entertainer and a businessman, and a successful one at that. And he was voted into office to get rid of the corruption that people were tired of, just like Donald Trump. He was voted into office as a big throbbing middle finger to the establishment. And he has done a lot to break the grip of the oligarchs in Ukraine. And so, you know, he's more like Donald Trump than you think. Mama Rissa asks, are Ukrainians living in Russian-controlled areas, or are they all evacuated? No, there are millions of Ukrainians still living in Russian-controlled areas because Russia took over much of that area very quickly. Now, those people have been assimilated into Russian society. Many of them have been forced to get Russian passports and give up their Ukrainian passports. But if given the chance, they would very gladly rejoin Ukraine. They see themselves as Ukrainians, and they are absolutely horrified by what has happened to them and their families. And so many, if not most, of the people who are currently under Russian occupation would very much like not to be. And I know that because I was in Kherson 2 days after it was liberated. And you wouldn't believe the parties that were going on there. You wouldn't believe the tears that were being shed of joy. You wouldn't believe how every house, every building, everything had a Ukrainian flag on it that they had literally buried and hidden while Russia was in control of Kherson. They do not want to be part of Russia. Okay. Now, let's see. How true is the story of Western interference in Ukraine politics in 2014? In talking to Ukrainians, they don't believe it. I mean, it's hard to say what the CIA was involved in. There's a lot of rumor, but it's just that, it's rumor. If you ask the Ukrainians, did the United States unfairly influence your elections in 2014? They'll say, heck no, we wanted those guys gone. We wanted to you know, I mean, if there was any interference, it was by Russia, by putting in their puppet president and declaring the elections null, which is what caused the Maidan Square massacre and all that. And I was there for that. I was there in 2014. I saw it happen with my own eyes. And talking to them then, there wasn't anybody that I talked to in Ukraine who was like, no, we want to be part of Russia. No, the United States CIA is you know, messing with our politics. Nobody said that. Okay. All right. Well, we are over time. And I got to get some sleep tonight because I got to travel tomorrow. So thank you for all of your very good questions. And I appreciate every one of you. Please, again, go to chuckholton.com and you can sign up over there. And you don't have to sign up. You don't have to pay anything, but you can watch a section. The documentary came in 5 parts. And so the entire 5-part documentary is available on the website if you are a supporter, which means you have to, you know, pay $7 a month. But you can watch the part about the sexual atrocities that were committed against Ukrainian women. If you go look, just become a subscriber for free at chuckholton.com. You can go and watch that. So I highly recommend you do that. And again, if you have any question about whose side you should be on in this conflict, just remember one thing: Ukraine didn't invade anybody. Okay? Ukraine didn't invade anybody. Question: do you think any surrounding countries are in potential danger from Russia? Well, yes, I do, in that Russia is threatening them and would threaten them if it managed to take Ukraine, because then it would inherit all of the weapons and everything that Ukraine has, and that would be the only way they'd be able to very quickly rebuild their armed forces. But in reality, I just don't think that's going to happen, because even if the United States pulls out and doesn't help Ukraine a bit, every Ukrainian is going to continue to fight. It's going to be a long-term insurgency inside Ukraine, because the Ukrainians are 120% against becoming part of Russia. And they're going to fight them until there are no Ukrainians left. But I think, at least I pray, that Russia will see reason and will leave. Just like I say, this war could end tomorrow if Russia just stopped fighting and went home, and everybody would be happy. Robert H. says, can we please pray before ending? Sure, let's do that. Lord, we just come to you now with our hearts broken for all of the suffering that's going on in this world, in Israel and Ukraine, in Russia, in Burma, in Sudan, and Armenia, and many other places, Father. And so we just pray that you would come down, you would send your Holy Spirit to convict people of their sin, you would thwart the plans of evil men, and you would be glorified in what happens in the war in Ukraine. I pray that you'd give President Trump extraordinary wisdom to be able to end this war without having to make Ukraine lose its country in the process. And Lord, I pray that a year from now, we'll be able to look back and say, you did it in a miraculous way. And we just give you all the glory in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay. Thank you for watching. Appreciate you, all of you. We'll see you again next time. How do I end this thing? I hit this button here, I think. Okay. Bye-bye.